Hi, everybody. It's Deep Work Fast, and it's the solstice. That means it's the longest day of the year. So hopefully, you have plans to enjoy the longest day. I'm only going to take 20 minutes or less. So let's jump on in. Today, I want to talk about. Huh, hey, wow, can't talk today. Hi, we're live. Okay, a thinking pattern that is habitual and tends to drive what we say and do, also in habitual ways, if we're not intentional about what's happening and if we're not really paying attention. And the reason I picked this is because this thinking and behavior in particular tends to be at the core of what I call a vicious cycle that damages intimate relationships and work relationships in ways that, if allowed to just continue to go for years and years, which in a few minutes we'll talk about that, because a lot of people have had this for years and years because we all had it in our families and in the way we think collectively. Anyway, when it plays out, it's not pretty and it's really, really hard to undo if it's been going for a long time. And I'm going to talk about that. I also had it in the blog this week. The link will be in this. It's not even Mercury retrograde. I can't talk. I'm hitting things. Woo! Okay, so let's get in here. The thinking pattern that I am talking about is related to a concept anchored with the word should or should not. So think about yourself. No shame, no guilt. We all do this, right? We all have moments, and I'm sure you witness it with other people, where either before a situation, we are projecting a lot of shoulds. This should happen. This should not happen. And then after something happens, specifically if it doesn't play out the way we wanted it to, there's a lot of you should haves, I should have, etc. Now, like I was saying, this is habitual for most people because we've all been socialized to think this way for a very, very long time. Like it's normal. And I have witnessed it normal in many cultures and languages. So it's not just Americans. For those of you who are watching me and you're from the US, it's a thing. It's a thing on global teams. It's a thing in relationships where the people aren't from the same country. Okay, let's talk about it. So the reason I say this is flawed thinking is because at the core of it, the minute you know that you're thinking something should happen or should have happened, it should be an indicator to you that the situation we're talking about was not or is not grounded in reality. Yeah, that's big, isn't it? This is Deep Work Fast. Okay, so the reason I'm saying that is because if we're projecting that something should have happened or should happen and it doesn't actually happen in real life, it means somewhere in the process, we had a vision of what was supposed to happen, right? Like we had a vision of the outcomes of the goals. We had a vision for what the project or the chore at home was going to look like when we or another person executed, right? That's what I mean. Because in every situation, no matter what, let's just talk about this and think about it. I want you to think about yourself first. I don't want you to project this onto other people at this moment, right? I want you to get self-awareness around it. I'm going to talk about myself a little bit because today I actually had a big should come up and it was great. It wasn't great. But it was great because it helped me get ready for this. So when we are committing to something, when we are thinking about how we want something to unfold, whether we know it or not, we have a lot of thoughts, and the more invested we are in this thing, so, and I mean invested in time, in emotional need for something to be a certain way. Maybe we've actually invested a lot of money in something, like let's pretend you're redoing your kitchen. That's a great example, right? Lots of thoughts about the way it should be and lots of money invested in it. So now there's risk in it not coming out the way we plan. And then we include a whole bunch of people in the process. And most of the time, here's where we're not getting the reality part of it. Most of the time, and I coach a lot of people, I hear a lot of these stories, I debrief with a lot of people, so I've got a lot of should stories. Here's what happens, right? Most of us don't slow down, and most of us are not impeccable in the way we describe to the other people, if there are other people, not only what we want, but what of the how it happens matters to us. And often what I find is we're moving so fast that we also sometimes don't adequately communicate to others why it's important to us, like how deeply certain parts of it are important to us, like why that is. So a lot of that's in our head and not translating into the alignment or the agreement we have with our spouse or that we have with the people on our team. Now, here's part of the reason it's also not reality is that we're all busy and distracted. So it's not uncommon for us to communicate with someone, for the person to agree, say that they understand, say that they're in agreement, tell you they're going to do the thing. And then, like I said, when it's executed, it doesn't necessarily do exactly what you had in your head. And so, in reality, it's not the picture that you had. It doesn't feel the way you wanted to feel. Maybe if it's money, we've spent more than we agreed to, or needed to, or you wanted to. And then we end up with disappointment. We end up with anger. We end up with resentment, frustration. And so earlier, what I was saying is that, first of all, understand that that cycle that I just described to you, something's going to happen. We have a lot of investment in it. We want certain things. Maybe we have other people, we communicate that, something takes place, and then we live with the results of that and often are disappointed. That is the cycle I'm talking about that is pretty normal. I hear about it all the time. And that's why I'm saying there's a lot of flawed thinking in it, because if the thinking was right and we were grounded in reality and aligned with the other people from the beginning, we'd probably experience more success and fulfillment and happiness together. Like, yeah, we accomplished it after all these things. But what I find when I'm coaching people is those aren't the stories I'm hearing on a regular basis. I hear more of the other one. That's why I say this is habitual and it's happening with everybody and it is collective. And the reason I want to say that to you is because we're used to it. Like, we are actually, I think, very accustomed to talking with each other and being almost ready to be disappointed. Isn't that a bummer? Right? Like, I think we expect to be disappointed. And if we are on a team or in relationships where we have let each other down before, chances are it's going to keep happening unless we change our thinking and change the behavior, like give ourselves some new ways of saying and doing things. If in fact the situation isn't going well or ends badly, so that we don't repeat this cycle. Now, let me just pause here and just say, this is not easy stuff. That's why I'm doing it on Deep Work Fast. When I released this blog, my initial feedback from people was they thought it was funny because I say something that's a little bit of a pun. It's kind of weird, but I always say stop shoulding on people, stop shoulding on yourself. I know it's funny and it gets someone's attention sometimes, but this idea is no joke. And like I said, it's at the core of a lot of relationships and teams falling apart. It is sometimes a main reason that people get a divorce or break up. And I've seen people get fired over it because it's been allowed to kind of be the main dynamic in those relationships. Now, I want to talk about this because I want you to get clear about how it's playing out in your work and relationships, right? So, first of all, in our intimate relationships, if you don't want this dynamic, you've got to build in really clear, like I said, impeccable communication with your partner early, proactively, so that later all that energy isn't spent being disappointed, frustrated, and resentful after the fact. So it's an investment of time and energy, which oftentimes we don't think we have time for. And most relationships, that kind of talk with each other isn't a habit that many couples have, right? You go from dating where it's like nice and yummy and flirty and juicy, and you don't want any of those serious conversations. But then you get married and now you're sharing money and maybe you have kids, etc. You can't avoid now, every day could have 100 situations in it that maybe you don't have always the time to talk through every one of them in a line. And so chances are there's going to be a lot of opportunity for shoulds happening and a lot of opportunity, because we're fallible humans, for the other person not to execute the way you were envisioning it in your head, right? And vice versa. We can't read each other's minds. So, what do you have to do? You've got to slow down. You've got to spend time together. You got to talk about the most important things. You don't have to talk about everything, but you do need to make agreements about what matters most, so that during the day to day, and then when you get to the big things, that you are aligned with what each other is actually seeing in your head. And the minute you start having shoulds, which happens super early, I want you to really dive deep here and get to know yourself. Chances are, if you're like me, if you spend some time thinking about this, you probably spend a lot of time shoulding. I'm in the business of coaching people. I am constantly wishing people would have done something different. Seriously, I get paid to do this. I also get paid to hear the stories about stuff that's gone wrong. So if you don't think I've had to work on this, come on. Like, this is very, very real. But when you shift it, everything changes. Because when we are having those should thoughts, the people around us the most, our intimate partners, our children, and our employees, right? So the people that we interact with the most, because we are interacting a lot, we get to know each other's tell signs. So before the should comes out of your brain and out of your mouth, your body language shows it. Your vibe shows it. Your attitude shows it. Your email tone shows it. Whatever, right? We are communicating with each other all the time. So when we are imagining in our head, oh, if I don't tell him, he's going to do this, and I should get in front of this, and I should control this, and oh my gosh, last time this is how it went wrong, and so, right? And we all do it, men and women, at work and at home. And the only way to break the pattern is to know that you're doing it. Know how to stop yourself before what's going on in your head comes out in your behavior or your words. That's why I've mentioned this before, we have a technique that we teach called stop, challenge, and choose. That's what this is for. I have my should thoughts. It starts to get me all wound up based on physical reality of things not working, or sometimes just the story in my head. I got to stop myself before it kicks in and creates that new cycle, or continues an ongoing cycle where myself, alone with myself, and other people start to just go with the momentum of it, which always ends badly. The reason I'm saying that is because the days of people, I don't know another way to explain this, but I think that we have changed so much as a society that there were generations in the past, our grandparents, my parents for sure, maybe even some of us when we were young, where we lived by my way or the highway. I mean, I worked in jobs, I'm sure you did too, where the bosses said things, and even if you didn't agree, you did it. And if you didn't, you were afraid you would be fired or you were fired. So, what did we do? We all learned to keep a lot of thoughts in. We learned that even if the boss was nuts and the boss was asking us to do things that were impossible, if we couldn't push back, we learned to live in that land of fantasy, but put a lot of effort and energy into executing it. Sometimes disappointing and getting in trouble and getting shoulded. But we all learned to do the same thing. Now, the world we're in today is not going to accept that, which is for those of you who are still trying to use that technique, and I see it in coaching leaders a lot, it's not working anymore. One, the work that we're doing together on our teams is too complicated for that. It's not linear, and it's usually not based on like one thing. So having one right way, in most cases, that's actually not even true. It's not real. So it's from the get-go, it's not reality. The new world takes alignment. Earlier, we started with that intimate relationship, but at work, it's the same. You've got to slow down. We have to do what most businesses and teams don't want to do, go slower to go fast later. Now, that's a cliche for most people, but I'm telling you that's real, specific to what we're talking about. If on the front end, we need more alignment, and I'm not talking about the buzzword of alignment, I mean actually talking through what could go wrong. What does success look like? What are all the variables that are going to show up during the process that each of us is going to have a bunch of shoulds? Say that out loud to each other. That's going to prevent all of the back end post-mortem disappointment and issues. And if you're in a business, so I'm going to talk about work right now, although some of this does translate to some people's homes, but I'm going to talk about work. If you're in a workplace that is used to a super fast paced, lots of challenges, and sometimes because the business has been really good at growing really fast, so setting what feel like stretch goals that are super unrealistic is normal. And I know a lot of workplaces that function that way. That means more than 50% of the time, reality's probably not going to be on your side. And the reason I say that is because the workplace and the consumer landscape is so dynamic that when we're starting a project, when we're setting our goals, when we start to execute on all the initiatives and the things that are related to it, chances are a lot of the data that we had is going to change. A lot of our assumptions might be wrong midway through the year. Things can actually go wrong. People can mess up, right? So just think about that. So the old linear world and what I call what was blue collar thinking, when a lot of our industry was actually that, right? It was highly predictable. It was hierarchical. There was a ton of structure, and it was made to be predictable and consistent. We're not living in that world anymore. That just means our relationships and the way we interact with each other are kind of ripe for either a ton of shoulds and disappointment, or we've got to do something different. So I've got less than a minute. If you haven't read the blog, grab it. If you need help with this, you know where to find me. I know that you can do a lot of this on your own, though. You just have to be willing to recognize when you hear the should in your head or you hear it from someone else, to stop, to challenge yourself not to go there, but instead be curious and think about how you can create alignment, and maybe pause and ask for a conversation with anybody else involved and re-clarify what really, really matters. It'll make a huge difference, I promise. Even though I'm not going to say it's magic, I will tell you it's so different than what most people are used to. All of a sudden, their ears will be more open versus their ears closing up. And you know what I mean when they know what's coming at them as a should, and then they start to feel defensive. Anyway, I'm at my limit. I could talk about this all day. It's that important. So read the blog. If you need help, you know where to find me. And have a great rest of your solstice. Remember, it's a long day, so get outside and have some fun. Okay, bye.